Hello everybody, hope you're having a wonderful day, and this is lesson number 15 in our dive into the wonderful world of music theory. So in case you haven't seen the last lesson or don't know what we talked about, then I really do encourage you to do, because this is just a continuation of that. So in the last lesson we talked about notes. We talked about what they are, we talked about how we use them, what they mean, and we talked about some of the different types of notes. There I talked about three different types of notes. We talked about the whole note, we talked about the half note, and we talked about the quarter note. And today my aim is to talk about two more notes, those being the eighth note and the 16th note. So without further ado, let's get into that. So number 4, this is numbering system from last time, this is the eighth note. So what is the eighth note? So now the alternate name for this, the British name for it, is the quaver. So the eighth note or quaver. Again, I encourage you to, as a beginner in music, to keep in mind, to keep this one in mind, because it's more intuitive and it's easier to remember. So what does an eighth note look like? Let's first get that out of the way. So like a lot of other notes, we have a filled in oval in the top, then we have a line that goes down, but oh, when you look at this, so of course we have a filled in oval, right? Then we have a line, the stem, and we also have something here, and this is called a flag. So this thing right here which you see, which goes like that, this is called a flag. Conversely, if I draw this in the other orientation, it looks like this. And I'm sure we've all, this is probably alongside the quarter note, one of the most famous notes in music. It looks like this, and I'm sure we've seen this everywhere, right? So yes, this part here is called a flag, right? And like the other, it's got a filled in oval, very important for the note head, right? Filled in oval, and then it's also got a note stem, and in addition it has a flag. So that's how you differentiate between the eighth note and quarter note. This has a flag, the quarter note does not. And just like with the quarter note, half note, quarter note and half note, the orientation depends on where you place it in the staff. So if you're placing it in the bottom half, you'll write it like that. If you're placing it in the top half, you'll write it like that. Okay, so what is its value, its note value? Well, as the name suggests, it's exactly 1/8. So the note value of this note is exactly 1/8. And we talked about what note values are and what they mean in the last lesson. That's why I'm encouraging you to go watch that. But it's exactly 1/8. So yeah, that's the eighth note. The next note in the series, and the last note we'll be talking about for this lesson, is the 16th note. And the other name for this, the British name, is the semiquaver. So 16 or semiquaver. Once again, I encourage you to memorize this one in the beginning, because it's more intuitive and it's easier to remember. Now let's talk about 16th note. What does it look like? Well, it's quite similar to the 8th note in that filled in oval for the note head, the note stem, and it's also got a flag. But unlike the 8th note, it has got not one but two flags. So I'm going to draw that again. Instead of having just one flag, it has two flags, and they kind of meet at the end. Instead of having one, it has exactly two. So let me try drawing it again, just so I can clearly put it across. So this is better. I'll just draw it like this. Exactly, it looks exactly like this, where at the end here they join together, but you can clearly see two flags. So the difference between the 8th note and the 16th note is that the 16th note has two flags, whereas the 8th note only has one. So these things here are called flags, and 16th note has two, the 8th note only has one. That's the difference between them. Other than that, same orientation. If it's on the, it'll be like this if it's on the top half, and like that if it's on the bottom half. And it also has a note stem and note head, which is colored in. And the value of this note is 1/16, exactly 1/16. So 1/8 and 1/16. And hopefully that's about it for just the basic overview. So again, this is the 8th note, value 1/8, 16th note, value 1/16. and this is somewhat what they look like. Okay, now with that being said, there is one very important thing I want to cover. Now this is very important. So if I would really encourage you to pay close attention to this. So when I'm writing multiple eighth notes in a row, one eighth note after another eighth note after another eighth note, let me just draw an example for you. When I'm writing something like this, where there are multiple eighth notes in a row, I do. Let me just draw a fourth one. So check. I do not write it like this. Instead, what we do is we do this. And we connect it with one singular line. And you might be thinking, why do we do this? Well, it's because this first version is very messy. Hopefully, as I outlined, especially when you're writing on the staff, this looks very messy. It's not only hard to write, it's also extremely hard to read. It's messy and hard to read, so we don't do it this way. Instead, the way we've come about to circumvent that is that we group them together under one singular line. When we're writing one eighth note, we still write it the regular way. When we're writing multiple eighth notes, we usually group them together. We can group them in twos, fours, threes, sixes, and so on and so forth. Now I won't tell you exactly how you group them together. Like you group them in groups of 4, 2, 3, or 6, or whatever, similar thing, because that has to do with time signature, and that's not something we haven't discussed yet. So I won't be covering that, but I can tell you we generally do it in either groups of 2, 4, and 2, 3, and 4. Sometimes you'll see 6, sometimes you'll see 8. I've not personally counted it, but it is theoretically possible. But yeah, it's completely dependent on something called the time signature. That's something we'll be getting into in the future. So once again, when there's a single line like this, it just means that these are all eighth notes. All of these are eighth notes, and when they're joined by one line like this, and we do that because if we draw all the flags individually, it becomes very messy and hard to read. Similarly, if I've got multiple 16th notes in a row, you'll have to excuse my drawing skills here, but hopefully I put across the message. As you might expect, I do not draw them like this for the exact same reason. Instead, I draw them like this. If you just give me a moment. Once again, I connect them with one line and just properly. But instead of one line, I draw two lines. So perhaps let me make them more clear. I'll give you an example of two notes just for now. Two lines, correct them. So because there were a double flag, two flags, instead of drawing one line, I draw two lines. Once again, if you want to write a single 16th note, you write it regularly, like that, right? Should probably make it more clear. You write it regularly like that. But when you want to write multiple, you usually group them together like this, where you have two lines. So if you see one parallel line with a bunch of notes like this, that means that all of those notes, all of them are eighth notes. And if you see two parallel lines like this, all of them are 16th notes. Okay, once again, all of them. So for now, all you have to really worry about is reading this. So whenever you see music written like this, just remember these are all eighth notes and these are all 16th notes. Don't worry about writing it, because as I said, we've not discussed how you are supposed to group them. But once again, whenever you see notes grouped like this is one line, it is this, they are all eighth notes, and whenever you see notes grouped like this with two lines, they are all 16th notes. Anyway, with that out of the way, I thought we'd connect this to our previous lessons, and we sort of see what are what value these notes hold in terms of the other notes we've discovered. So my first question I'd pose is, how many eighth notes are there in one quarter note? We've already talked about this in the previous session with the other notes, but now we've learned some new ones. Let's try to figure that out. How many eighth notes are there in a quarter note? I encourage you to pause the video and figure it out, and the key is the value. So I am assuming that you paused the video and tried to figure it out, and the answer is 2. I won't connect them here to stop confusion, but yeah, the answer is exactly 2 notes is the same as one quarter note. 2 individual eighth notes have the same value as one quarter note would, and once again what that means is that a quarter note is to be played twice as long as an eighth note. The duration that a quarter note dictates is twice as long as an eighth note. Okay, so that's what this means. The quarter note is twice as massive, or it dictates sound to be played for twice as long as an eighth note dictates. That's what this sort of relationship means. Similarly, how many 16th notes are there in one eighth note, and I encourage you to think about this. And I'm assuming you pause the video to try to think about it, but the answer is very clearly 2. My representation in notes is getting progressively worse, but hopefully it's still decipherable. So how many 16th notes are there in one eighth note? The answer is 2. And again, what does that mean? That the eighth note is twice as long as the 16th note. When you see eighth note, that sound is supposed to be played for twice as long as a similar sound will be played when you wrote it with a 16th note. That's what this means. What about how many 16th notes in a quarter note? Same routine, I encourage you to pause the video. And the answer is, how many 16th notes? Well, there are exactly 4. There are 4 16th notes in one quarter note. And what does this mean? That a quarter note is 4 times as long as a 16th note. And one final exercise. How many eighth notes in a half note? And once again, the answer is 4. And that means that the half note is 4 times as long as one eighth note. So if I was playing music and I saw a half note, I will play that sound 4 times as long as what the next sound would be, maybe an eighth note, right? So if I say half note and eighth note, the second sound is going to be 4 times shorter as the first sound. That's what this entire system means. Now, as you can see, last lesson I only taught you 3 notes, that being the whole note, half note, and quarter note, right? So I couldn't, there's not many permutations, but with 5 notes, still not that many, but there are multiple different matchups we can do. So after this lesson, I've linked to both an article, which I've prepared, and hopefully a worksheet. I have linked a worksheet which has multiple different problems like this, and I really encourage you to go do that worksheet, because after all, just like practical music, theoretical music is all about practice. So theoretical music is all about practice. So a bunch of worksheets, one worksheet has been linked with a bunch of these problems that are there. I encourage you to go do that, because it will give you better understanding for how these notes stack up with each other, and once again, these values indirectly in the end correspond to how long notes are supposed to be played. Now, with that being said, just before I end the lesson today, I want to cover one last thing, and that is, let me in fact just erase some of the stuff I've written here. I need some space, so let me just get rid of this. So last class I talked about the note pyramid, and this was just a way we were writing down notes. We were just representing notes in terms of their value and their hierarchical value, and I said this was a very intuitive way, as usually used in a lot of music classrooms, of giving the value. So let's continue on the pyramid. So as I said, it starts off at the top with the whole note, which is the largest value note we've learned so far. Then a whole note can be divided into two half notes. Then those half notes can be divided into 2 quarter notes. And now we can continue this. So again, once again, this is in order of this is in hierarchy of value, and this is exactly showing how these stack up. And using this diagram, you can easily see two half notes in a whole note, 4 quarter notes in a whole note, and so on and so forth. Let's try to continue this one. So in a quarter note, there are 2 eighth notes. We established this. So it'll take me some time to draw it for all of them, but it is important that we do. And each eighth note also has 2 16th notes. And this is going to take a long time to draw, but yes. So once again, the main reason we're using this diagram is because it gives us an intuitive understanding for how these notes stack up in terms of value, and also in terms of how many of one create the other. Now, of course, I should have planned ahead. I did not have much space to write for these 16th notes in, but hopefully it gives you an overall picture. I'll probably have a prettier version of this linked after this lesson. But as you can see, you can very clearly see using this diagram that, and in music exams it might help to draw this if you're ever confused. So 4 eighth notes in one half note. Okay. 4 16th notes in one quarter note. Okay, 16 16th notes in one whole note. I don't want to give too much away, otherwise the worksheet won't be as fun. But yes, so I thought I'd complete the note pyramid which I started drawing last lesson for some greater understanding. That being said, hopefully you have enjoyed this lesson. Hopefully you've been able to take something away. Hopefully you've understood something new and you enjoyed it. That being said, I think what I wanted to cover for today is done. Hopefully you have a nice day moving forward, and I'll see you next lesson. Bye.